Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much again for joining us today. My name is Dane Wadley. I'm the Senior Field Coordinator for CSDA, essentially the local liaison to special districts in our Sierra network at CSDA, which for us includes Sacramento, Stockton, Modesto, Gold Country, and the High Sierra, Tahoe, Mono County, et cetera. So as I said, on behalf of CSDA, just welcome you to our tour. As we know, COVID-19 has changed many things, and that obviously includes our CSDA tours as well. And instead of climbing onto a tour bus and having some good meals at some districts, we're having to change some things up. But we still wanted to provide this virtual format to showcase the work that special districts are doing for communities across the state. And in this case, today we're going to be talking about mitigating wildfire and protecting our forests, watersheds, and communities. Just to give you a little preview of our agenda, we're going to be touring 3 districts this morning, with each showing a short video followed by a presentation from district representatives. So I'll be going through that whole process. We have a 15-minute section at the end for questions and answers. As Roman mentioned, if you have questions as you go along, please enter those into our Q&A, and we will get to them at that section of the agenda. So with that, I'd like to introduce my co-pilot for this tour, Chris Norton.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us on this virtual tour. My name is Chris Norton. I am the field coordinator for the Northern Network, which includes Butte and Mendocino counties all the way up to the Oregon border. So before we begin, I'd like to kick it over to our Advocacy and Public Affairs Director, Kyle Packham, who has a brief presentation he'd like to give.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dane, and welcome everybody. It's very exciting to be able to do this today virtually. We had a lot of great positive feedback from all of you about this opportunity. I'm so glad that you've all taken your time to join us today. I know that during COVID, it is crazy times, even during the interim recess. And so we respect and value your time, and we are going to hopefully make this very interesting, which means that I'm going to do a quick overview about special districts for you now. And then we're going to turn it over to really the stars of the show, which are our members, the special districts out in the field doing some really amazing work in this space that I hope that everybody on the call, on the webinar, finds valuable for your needs going forward throughout this year and beyond. So before we turn it over to them, though, let's talk about what is a special district so you know who's going to be talking to you. We like to consider special districts the most local of local governments. But a lot of people will ask, what is a special district? They probably know a special district, and they might even love a special district. It might be the people that come to their rescue when they're in need. It might be the people that are delivering their water. It might be the park that they take their children to go play at. But some folks might assume that that park is ran by the city or the county. They might assume that that water is being provided by a company and not a public agency. And so our job is to try and educate the public and make sure that policymakers understand who are these independent special districts out there doing these essential services. As you can see, special districts actually exist throughout the United States, and they take in almost 20% of the local revenue and provide equivalent services when it comes to fire protection, 15% healthcare, 33% roads, 7% wastewater, 23% parks and rec, 14%. As you can see, 40% of utilities across the country. And so these really are essential services. They are emergency services. They are the types of services that keep communities running. They do exist both in incorporated and unincorporated areas. Oftentimes, special districts can be as small as a neighborhood. They can be as large as a region to provide specialization and maximize economies of scale and things like that to a region. Or they can be small and neat in order to solve a particular problem for a community. But they do exist all throughout the state. As you can see, they exist in both large communities and small communities, whether it's under 50,000 in population or over 500,000 in population. They are as diverse as our state is. What is the point of special districts? It's essentially in the name. It's to deliver specialized services. They do maintain a large degree of our critical infrastructure throughout the state, employing first responders and essential workers to do so. There are about 30,000 of them throughout the United States, with 2,000 independent special districts right here in California. These are local governments that are created by the people, usually through local agency formation commissions, typically involving at the end of that process a vote of the people. If there are taxes involved, that would require a 2/3 vote of the people to approve it. And so they are not created lightly, and they are created with community input. Technically, they are subdivisions of the state, just like cities and counties are, and they are authorized in state statute through what we call enabling acts. And so how are they established and governed? Let's talk about that just in a little bit more detail. So it is through that public process, typically through a local agency formation commission. All special districts are ultimately owned and overseen by the community through a public board of directors. In most cases, that board of directors is elected by the people, by the voters, sometimes by landowners. And on some occasions, such as with public cemetery districts and mosquito abatement districts, they have boards that are appointed to what we call a fixed term, meaning that they are ultimately accountable to the community, and they cannot just be pulled back if they don't happen to make the exact policy decisions that the appointing body would have them make. So they are independent in that nature. Again, those are primarily mosquito abatement districts and public cemetery districts. They are subject to all of the local government sunshine laws and then some. That includes Brown Act requirements, California Public Records Act requirements, website requirements. They're required to submit regular audits and comply with state controller's office and state treasurer's office regulations. So they have to provide compensation reports and financial transaction reports, et cetera, that are all publicly available on the internet. And at the end of the day, we like to think that they are some of the most responsive, accessible, and accountable governments out there. And now, of course, I'm going to be saying that because I'm with the association that represents them. But the reason behind that is that if you think about it, if you go to your local rec and park district and you want to talk about that, I was actually just doing this the other day, pushing my kids on a swing at the playground, and the swing was so low that the kids' feet, you know, even my 2-year-old, they were hitting the ground and you couldn't really push her on the swing. And I was thinking, this needs to be fixed. And, you know, if I go to the local rec and park district with that conversation, it's actually the kind of conversation that they're going to know that park. They might even know that swing. And the board members are particularly focused on recreation and parks throughout that community versus going to a larger, you know, general purpose government that's dealing with any myriad of problems. That might be one of the smallest of problems to them. And you might not have the same sort of responsiveness, same sort of access that you would otherwise have. Also, typically these boards are holding meetings in the community down the street. You're not needing to drive to the county seat or drive to Sacramento, et cetera, to get your problems addressed. And you're probably running into the local board member in the grocery store. Not only that, but getting elected to one of these boards isn't necessarily a multi-million-dollar adventure and that type of a campaign, right? So the types of people that are serving on these boards are not necessarily looking to become president of the United States next year. They're just looking to serve their community. They love their community, they're passionate about their community, and they're typically, oftentimes, experts in the field. I see on our local water boards all the time, people who are either current or retired engineers and accountants and all those sorts of specializations that really help get the job done. A brief history of special districts. They're all essentially originated to meet a need. They date back nationally to the 18th century with park districts, but toll roads and those sorts of things started popping up thereafter. Here in California, the first special district was the Turlock Irrigation District, established in 1887. The number of special districts really grew after World War II, when you had the baby boom and lots of people moving into the state and needing services and needing them quickly. And special districts are that nimble type of district, that nimble type of government that can meet those sorts of needs. The Turlock Irrigation District is kind of a great example of how special districts generally start. If you think about it, you have a group of farmers that before coming together, maybe they were fending for themselves to try to make sure they had reliable water supply for their livelihoods. And they kind of figured out, hey, if we all pitch in together, if we're willing to charge ourselves fees or tax ourselves, we can appoint ourselves to oversee this board, make sure it's controlled locally, make sure that money's spent how we need it here in the community to solve this particular problem. And we'll specialize in that, make sure it's done really well, make sure it's done with local control. That's how most special districts are created. Marin-Sonoma Mosquito Abatement District was the first of those created out in the San Francisco Bay Area, because San Francisco Bay Area used to be a large marshy area with a lot of mosquito problems, as you could imagine. And so they're created to solve a need to fix a problem. The numbers started to stabilize in the 1970s. My hypothesis as to that reason is generally because of two reasons. One is the establishment of local agency formation commissions, which are designed in order to make sure there's controlled growth, right? Make sure there's organized growth, particularly of local agencies, such that they are not providing duplicative services or overlapping. And as communities evolve and change, they ensure that they do so in an organized manner. And that has largely worked, as well as with Proposition 13 passing in 1978. It really limited the amount of revenue that can be used at the local level. And so the ability to create these sorts of governments to solve these problems is obviously limited from a revenue standpoint. But they do continue to evolve with communities' needs. Speaking of revenue and property taxes, special districts receive about 8% of the California statewide property tax. So it's really a very, very small share. You might recall redevelopment agencies, which were diverting up to 10% of the property taxes, and yet special districts are receiving about 8% of California property taxes, and yet providing all of these services across the state to millions of people. In addition to property taxes, some special districts, particularly water districts and utility districts for electricity, such as SMUD here in Sacramento, will charge a rate for service. They rarely receive sales tax. That's very rare, particularly here in California. I believe there might be one or two districts, but I couldn't even tell you their names off the top of my head. And all of their revenues are approved and overseen by the voters. And so particularly with taxes, special district taxes are automatically special taxes, as it would sound, which requires a 2/3 vote of the people. Any general obligation bonds require a 2/3 vote of the people, unlike school bonds, which require a 55% vote. And unlike general taxes for cities and counties, which require a 50% vote. And so there's a higher vote approval threshold. And even rates require a Proposition 218 process where you can have a majority protest involved. And so all of their revenues do require a vote of the people. They also do infrastructure financing, and they do strategically develop their reserves to help them in the case of emergencies like we've seen here in California recently. I do want to point out that special districts usually receive both what we call enterprise and non-enterprise revenues. Enterprise revenues being those fees, non-enterprise being those taxes. There are both independent and non-independent special districts, excuse me, independent and dependent, that would be non-independent. And so the independent special districts are those that have those elected boards or who are appointed to fixed terms. You may also be familiar with some entities that are called special districts that are dependent of the appointing authority. Essentially, that just means that the appointing authority, usually the city or county, has direct control of the board and can recall those board members at any time, and sometimes can serve as ex officio, where the actual city council member or board member automatically serves as a special district board member. So I want to conclude by saying that at the end of the day, if you were to think of special districts, I'd like you to think of local service specialists. So they are local in the sense that they are focused on that local community or region. They provide services and they are specialists in their field. And the one takeaway I would leave with you in terms of an ask at this point in time would be with the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think you'll hear a little bit about today and see in the packet that was sent to you. Special districts are generally fairly well positioned because of their reserve funding, because of the way they plan ahead, but they are facing challenges that are having impacts on their essential workers. And to keep them strong going forward into the future, it would be very helpful if they were to have access to some of that federal relief and state relief that to date, by and large, they have not had access to like cities, counties, and the state have. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for that. Before we jump into our host districts, just wanted to have a brief overview from CSDA's resident expert and our partners who are real practitioners in this field. So I'd like to introduce Alyssa Silheil. She's a legislative representative for CSDA to give a brief overview of our topic today. Alyssa?
Thanks, Dane. Good morning. As Dane said, I'm Alyssa Silheil, one of the legislative representatives here at CSDA. My issue areas cover the environment, emergency response and disaster preparedness, and public works. I'm so glad you're able to join us this morning and hope that you find the information presented today useful and informative as you continue to seek solutions to make California resilient against catastrophic wildfire. If you have follow-up questions after this morning or at any time throughout the year on policy issues pertaining to wildfire mitigation, prevention, and how special districts intersect with this important work, please do reach out to me and consider me a resource. Today, we are going to go on a tour with the Placer County Water Agency, Western Shasta Resource Conservation District, and North Tahoe Fire Protection District to learn some of the innovative ways special districts operating in the wildland-urban interface are mitigating wildfire and protecting our forests, watersheds, and communities. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Next, I'd like to introduce Danielle Blassett-Hayden with CMUA to give a brief overview from the Municipal Utilities Association.
Great, thank you so much. Danielle Blassett-Hayden, the Deputy Executive Director with California Municipal Utilities Association. Thank you for the opportunity to participate and partner on this exciting tour. Today, we're going to virtually visit several special districts that are leaders in their communities and the state as they work to mitigate the risks and impacts of wildfire. These efforts protect our forests and watersheds, which provide so many benefits to our state, including improved water supply and quality, carbon sequestration, and more. We hope you find this virtual experience informative and enjoyable, and I really hope that we can all get out and visit these areas in person soon. Thanks so much.
Great, and then with that, I'd like to introduce Karen Burr, the Executive Director with California Association of RCDs.
Thank you. Good morning. Really appreciate being here. And thank you everyone for taking the time to really engage with this topic. I'm here just to introduce the resource conservation districts, and we sit at the intersection of community conservation and agriculture. So in this space, specifically with forestry, I am really grateful that there are RCDs on the ground. We're really helping to tackle a lot of the challenges that we're facing in the forestry sector. RCDs are there with their communities. They're helping to set up wildfire safety plans. They're helping to set up evacuation routes. They're helping landowners know how to do home hardening and protect themselves in their own spaces. And they're helping also after the fires. So they're coming in and helping people know what trees to cut down, which ones are going to come back, and how to keep their families and their homes safe into the future. The RCDs are out there on the ground with their communities doing a ton of work to make sure that we're all safe and have healthy forests.
Thank you, Karen. And with that, we'd like to show our first video from the Placer County Water Agency.
For the first time, the water agency in California is looking at its headwaters on federal lands and making investments of its ratepayers' money to thin property that we think is critical to water quality and water quantity for our ratepayers. So the agency owns and operates a hydroelectric and water supply project in the Middle Fork American River. We have critical watershed lands that serve our citizens, both from an energy standpoint, but also from a water supply standpoint.
The 35,000 acres behind me is really the watershed for this reservoir. And it's a combined about 25,000 acres of federal land and about 8,000 to 10,000 acres of private land.
And those headwaters lands above our reservoirs were in critical need of thinning to reduce the chance of catastrophic wildfire.
The idea with that is to create gaps in the canopy, which then will break the spread of a fire up and then also create a more diverse understory habitat.
The French Meadows project had been on the Forest Service project list for a long time, but because of their funding constraints, they weren't able to get to the project. So the agency started looking for ways to accomplish forest thinning on national forest lands. And we had to find partners in order to make that work. Chiefly, we had to work with the U.S. Forest Service because they own and operate that property.
Bringing back more of a historic fire regime to this landscape is going to benefit our watersheds, our wildlife. That's really how this landscape evolved.
The French Meadows Project is really an innovative partnership. And the innovation comes from not only the multiple funding sources, but the multiple expertise that those partners bring.
And so we went out looking for opportunities to partner with folks. And we came up with two major opportunities, the state of California and the Nature Conservancy.
We've inventoried the fuels on the ground. We've modeled the potential behavior under given weather conditions and on this terrain in this watershed so that we know the effectiveness of treatment in reducing fire danger.
We're bringing state dollars, state funding, primarily greenhouse gas reduction funding, as well as funding from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy to actually accomplish work on federal lands, which is something that hasn't been done before. And we're matching those state dollars with our ratepayer dollars, but we're also bringing in federal money as part of the U.S. Forest Service opportunity and corporate money from beverage companies like Coca-Cola and Coors who have an interest in reducing their water footprint in this watershed. So when you put all those sources of funding together, you come up with something like $12 million to accomplish thinning and prescribed fire on about 22,000 acres of federal land. This is down in the trenches getting this stuff done, and so being recognized by a statewide agency for us is just tremendous. And really what it does, it's an opportunity to spread this message of how we did this project in a collaborative way. And our sincerest hope is that other watersheds, other water agencies, other people with energy projects look at what we've done here and try to duplicate it in their watershed. That's the only way we're going to get California forests back into good shape.
With that, I'd like to turn it over to Andy Fecco with the Placer County Water Agency.
Thanks everybody for the opportunity to elaborate on that video. Hopefully you all enjoyed that. And yeah, so, you know, California, especially the foothills of California, are filled with special districts. And I think that we're all looking for ways to make a difference in our local communities. And so I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the French Meadows program some more, but also the fact that we want to balance two things: watershed health for the benefit of our energy project and our ratepayers who drink the water that's coming out of those reservoirs. But we also have communities, right? And so balancing the needs of sort of the upper watersheds and those wild places at the crest of the Sierras is really important for water quality, water quantity, and for our hydroelectric generation. But then we've got communities that are right in this wildland urban interface. And we wanted to address both of those problems. And so we start with the hypothesis that the more local the government, the better it is for finding solutions for the local folks. And so we've partnered with primarily the County of Placer on two programs. One is this, a way to protect local communities. And the way we're doing that is really with a grant opportunity where we take proceeds from our that we generate from the sale of hydroelectric energy, and that we put into a grant program for local special districts. And that might be someone like or folks like the City of Auburn Fire Department here in Placer County, or, and this is really important, fire safe councils, local fire safe councils in places like Michigan Bluff, Baker Ranch, Iowa Hill, Forest Hill. These are really small communities that don't have their own local governments. They are essentially unincorporated areas of the county, but they have these entities that can take in money from this grant program and match it. And this is the important part, match it with other state dollars, grant opportunities from the state of California, other federal grant opportunities, and they put all that money into a pile. And what they're doing with that is going out and finding private lands that are on the edge of the wildland urban interface, chiefly that are bordering federal lands, and approaching those landowners to accomplish thinning on those sort of usually typically larger parcels, and those larger parcels that are on the edges of communities, and essentially creating a fire break on private land. And so while we're advocating for action on federal lands and state lands in the wildland urban interface, we're also looking at the other side of the border at those private lands. And we wanted to deploy dollars on those private lands. And we figured out that the County of Placer is a really good conduit of money to places like things like those fire districts, but also those fire safe councils. And they're really good at finding really creative ways to find matching funds. And then when they get that money in, hiring private contractors to do work on private land. Program's been really successful. We've been deploying, give or take, $250,000 a year or so in the areas surrounding our project. And the private landowners have been really eager to get work done on their private lands. And that's just an example, the first example of a way that local special districts can put dollars to use on private lands. So then let's talk about the French Meadows project, which is in the upper watershed. The partnership there that I talked about in the introductory video is one that I think can be emulated in other places. And I know that Yuba Water Agency is doing something very similar. And so we're finishing our second year of implementation for that project. And I think that the idea there really is, again, working with the County of Placer to take dollars from multiple sources and concentrate them into a contracting stream that allows the County of Placer, through a master stewardship agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, the Tahoe National Forest in particular. That master stewardship agreement allows the County of Placer to hire local contractors, folks that trim trees, that log for a living, and hire them to perform work on federal lands. And that project is now, we're going to be about 4,000 acres complete of 22,000. And then we're going to start moving into implementation of prescribed fire to really sort of use that as a maintenance tool for those 22,000 acres. So happy to take questions on all of that at the end of everyone's presentation. Thanks again for the opportunity, CSDA.
Thank you, Andy. Next, we'd like to show a short video from Western Shasta Resource Conservation District, highlighting some of the great work that they did following the Carr Fire in 2018.
In 2018, the Carr Fire burned over 229,000 acres in Shasta County. Over 1,600 structures were destroyed. The fire affected residents and communities of Shasta, Keswick, and Western Redding. With much of the burn scar area left with bare ground and little ground vegetation for cover, the winter rains were expected to cause massive erosion and sediment flooding from the hillsides into the surrounding creeks and Sacramento River. In addition to the sediment, pollutants from the destroyed residences and structures posed a threat to water quality. The Western Shasta Resource Conservation District took on the task of implementing erosion control measures to reduce sediment flow from the burn scar areas into the creeks connecting to the Sacramento River.
And we're out here working at Carter Creek right now with the California Conservation Corps, and we're partnering with the State Water Board. And what we're trying to do is we're doing erosion control measures to prevent sediment and soil from ending up in priority watersheds that are used by Chinook salmon populations. And also these rivers and these streams feed into the Sacramento River, which is a priority for us because that's where we get our drinking water from.
Much of the groundwork was done by the RCD staff, California Conservation Corps, and CAL FIRE conservation crews. The erosion control measures included dispersing native grass seed to provide a natural method to stabilize the ground. A layer of certified weed-free straw was spread over the seed and bare ground to help provide an immediate surface cover. Numerous crew people worked on the project for months, transporting and distributing materials over the vast area. Over 1,100 acres were treated, and much of the terrain is steep and away from roadways. Though some hydroseeding was done in areas easily accessed by roads, the majority of the treated area had to be hand-treated. Log barriers were installed in areas that showed lower burn severity with some ground vegetation present, but the risk of erosion was still a concern. Much of the area was burned so severely that it would take years for the ground to regenerate without aid. Monitoring data suggests that the erosion control treatments were successful. Sediment loads from the treatment area samples were low and water quality remained good. The priority watersheds are intact and erosion was reduced. As an added bonus, the landscape looks to be recovering. The vegetation is growing back, habitat is being restored, and the wildlife is returning.
I would now like to introduce Maureen Tybert, who with the Western Shasta Resource Conservation District.
Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today and to really advocate for the work that we do, not only in our district in Western Shasta County, but for RCDs all over the state. We provide a very important role, and I'm really proud of the work that we do. And so for those of you who are not familiar with RCDs, I know that Karen gave a little bit of a plug in the beginning, but you know, there are 95 RCDs all over the state. Some are very small and some are large. And, you know, we in our district, we protect the natural resources of Shasta County by working with local landowners and kind of any partnering agency that wants to work with us. And so, you know, we provide a very valuable service. And in our district, we cover 1.7 million acres. So we have quite a bit of land to cover. And it's basically the headwaters of the Sacramento River. And so as you saw in the video, it was very important to us following the Carr fire to really try to help the community recover. And so, you know, we started almost immediately after the fire began, and it actually burned for several months, getting calls from local residents who had been affected by the fire and asking for help. And so we reached out to all of our partners and we said, okay, you know, what can we really do at this point? And, you know, the fire occurred in late July 2018. So we had a little bit of time before the rains were going to come, but we knew that because of the burn severity, it was very intensely burned in some areas. We needed to do on the ground work as quickly as we could. And so the State Water Resources Control Board reached out to us and they had gotten hazard mitigation funding through the disaster declaration from FEMA. And so this project was about $8 million worth of federally funding combined with state funding to complete erosion control. And we partnered with the California Conservation Corps and had at any given time 5 or 6 conservation crews on the ground spreading straw by hand. So it was mostly private land, and we wanted to target high severity burn areas. So we, you know, we were in the process of trying to recover. And then a few months after the car fire occurred, the camp fire happened in Butte County, which is just to the south of us. And, you know, that tragedy unfolded, and it became very apparent that California was suffering quite extensive wildfire activity. And so while we were recovering in early 2019, Governor Newsom issued an executive order to do emergency fuel reduction projects. 3 of the top 15 priority projects out of 35 that were identified by CAL FIRE happened to be in Shasta County. And so CAL FIRE had a pretty large task of trying to implement these 35 fuel breaks as quickly as possible. And so we actually partnered with CAL FIRE directly. They reached out to us and they asked us to implement one of the fuel breaks in Shasta County. And so, like I said, we were in recovery from the car fire, and we were already moving on to actually doing pre-wildfire mitigation for the next potential wildfire that might occur in Shasta County. What's nice about that is that we were able to direct contract with CAL FIRE, so CAL FIRE could just come to us and not have to, you know, actually search and go out to bid or anything on this work. And so we formed a partnership with them, and we started implementing the China Gulch fuel break. We ended up implementing that project and actually creating a 10-mile fuel break just west of Redding in an area called Happy Valley. So when we were able to do that, that was mostly private land again, a little bit of federal land, but mostly private land. So we actually had to coordinate all of those efforts, reach out to all the private landowners, get permission to go out on their property and organize and implement the fuel break and the fuel reduction work. And so we started that work in the spring of 2019, and we were completely done with the fuel break by December. It was very quick. And we actually were able to test that fuel break in 2020. There was a fire in Happy Valley, and our fuel break was proven successful, and they used that fuel break to stop the spread of the fire. One of the things I will say right now is that maintenance is a huge issue. So we should be out there right now maintaining this fuel break, maintaining all the fuel breaks that we implement. And so I would really advocate for that. Thinking more long-term on some of these things. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions about that or anything else after the rest of the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Appreciate it. Just a quick reminder to all the attendees that you can submit questions for our panelists in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And we'll cover those after our last video here, which we're going to jump into right now. With mitigating wildfires, we figured it was appropriate to have a fire district as one of our tour hosts. So we're going to queue up our video from the North Tahoe Fire Protection District right now.
Districts are using innovative and creative solutions to improve forest health and protect precious watersheds. So as the general manager of North Tahoe PUD, one of the things I find exciting about working for a special district is that ultimately we're better together via partnership. The North Tahoe Public Utility District provides water, sewer, and recreation to the communities of North Lake Tahoe, and it is within our mission to be an effective environmental steward. Beginning last year, our collaboration with North Tahoe Fire has resulted in the reduction of hazardous fuels on 150 acres of district-owned property, including the 124-acre North Tahoe Regional Park.
This year, despite sort of a not quite miracle March, our fuels are really dry, and you can just see it. And that's how dry things are here. And that the concern this year, of course, is with the winds we've had recently, this drying of fuels above 6,000 feet. Our fuel bed is ready to carry fire.
Special districts are truly better together. By building cohesive and collaborative partnerships, North Tahoe Fire has had strong success being able to take federal grant dollars, unite them with local match, and carry out robust fuel reduction treatments, as you can see behind me right here in the North Tahoe Regional Park.
This facility is located at a critical juncture in the wild and urban interface between the urban core, residential and commercial properties of North Lake Tahoe and the federally owned high country and wildlands of the basin. By doing fuels management and fuels reduction here in the forest, we've created a pretty critical fire break that a lightning strike up in the high country can help be mitigated and stamped down before it spreads down into the urban core. And similarly, a house fire within the urban core can be stamped out and prevented from spreading on, say, a red flag warning day from spreading up into the higher country and across the basin.
As special districts, we're constantly finding ourselves as the closest form of government. Our community members have an expectation for us to meet their needs, even if they're outside of traditional district missions. Going outside of our expectation to be there when they call 911 for fires at their home, a heart attack, or any other EMS needs, North Tahoe Fire has found the need to foster robust wildfire mitigation and fuels reduction projects in order to serve our community members. Here in North Tahoe, that critical need has been catastrophic wildfire.
This partnership created a badly needed fuel break to protect adjacent communities and critical utility infrastructure with defensible space, while making our forest healthier and more resilient to wildfire.
Great, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce Chief Mike Schwartz to present from the North Tahoe Fire District. Chief?
Yeah, well, hey, good morning, everybody. I'm assuming everybody can hear me. First of all, I wanted to say hi to all my colleagues and friends. I miss all of you guys. This is the 9 years for me going to the legislative days, and I'm super sad we're not doing it together. So first, I want to thank my staff, because without them, this would not have been possible, the video, nor the slide production and all the work. And so I want to start with that. I also want to thank CSDA and Dane Waddle particularly for giving us an opportunity to proudly talk about some of the great collaboration that we've been able to do together to mitigate fire. The slides I'm gonna put some slides up here. I might be a little technology prepared, but. All right, hopefully that everybody now sees the slide. All right, so the slide you're looking at is of Paradise and was born out of a rebuttal to an article in April of 2019 that was done by McClatchy News Network and USA Today. It was titled Destined to Burn. Many of you may have read it. It was a series of articles, and they did this post-campfire, and they profiled communities that shared similar, very high danger, fire danger and limited evacuation routes, and that the town of Paradise had. And unfortunately, 2 of these communities fell within our jurisdiction. I want to make a mention that there are big and small fire districts. And with North Tahoe, with 5 staff stations and 70 personnel, I usually coin this as a medium district that provides fire protection, prevention, and paramedic transport ambulance service. To talk a little bit about the article, which is sort of what I'm going to parallel here in my quick discussion, is the reporters had interviewed our staff and were provided the mitigation measures installed by the fire district locally, but they were notably absent from their article. So in response, the district published a rebuttal, thanks to our PIO, Aaron Holland, who's on the line, and it was called Destined to Burn, the Rest of the Story. And the good news is that with the way media works these days, that we've got a fair amount of coverage in contrast to the original article. And it covered how special district collaboration on hazard mitigation reduces risk, improves community safety and insurability, and really it is keeping Tahoe paradise. So special districts are special, as Kyle said, because of how they interact at the local level. I've worked for special districts for 40 years now. My experience is they work really close with their constituents. They are really good at working with other districts, whether they're fire districts or other special districts, as well as state and federal partners. In that sense, we play well with others, and that's not always true of government. North Tahoe Fire was originated back in 1941, consolidated with Tahoe City in 1993, and currently provides fire protection related services within 3 special district service areas, including the Meeks Bay Fire Protection District and Alpine Meadows. I like to tell people I'm that guy that works for 3 boards and ultimately has 15 bosses. I'm not sure how many people would want to sign up for that. Take a long way. So the Tahoe Basin's unique complexity demands cooperation within its 2 states, 5 counties, 6 districts, plus 3 adjacent eastern Placer County districts. The basin averages about 350 fire starts per year. So if you sort of costed that out across the year, that's a start a day. Most remain under 1 acre. We have had a history of some large fires. The Gondola Fire, Angora Fire, most notable in 2007 with 254 homes lost. More recently, the Emerald Fire, and then close to our district was the Washoe Fire. While it was less than 20 acres, it burned a dozen homes right in the North Tahoe district. But for the most part, through mitigations and interventions, we've been able to keep our fires relatively small. And so I think in some ways, we're a really good example of what communities can do to avoid catastrophic wildfire. So here you can see, So on the suppression side of the house, we reduce risk through closest forces and boundary drop agreements. These ensures that the closest, most appropriate units respond regardless of geopolitical boundaries. This is not as typical as you might think and expect. The fire service has a long tradition of competition and not collaboration. We've seen a big shift, I think, in my career, but I'm really proud that we have this 7-way boundary drop with our federal, state, and local partners. You can also see on this screen that this is right out of one of our vehicles, that we share data and dispatch. This not only includes fire engines, ambulances, chief officers, and hand crew, but infrastructure like fire hydrants, special hazards like avalanche or flood zones, building plans and pre-incident attack plans, access points to the park that Brad Johnson showed in the video. So I think these are all really, really important. Sorry, my 2 mice go different directions. On the prevention side of the house, we focus on code compliance, forest fuels management, community adaptation through public information, education, and of course, modifying our forest fuels. We now know that good forestry is good fire protection. Healthy forests resist catastrophic wildfire. Adapting our homes to a changing environment through defensible space inspections, home hardening, and code compliance activities. Through our grassroots efforts, community education programs, we have developed fire-adapted communities. And with these communities comes the NFPA FireWise USA designation, which, as people know, is recognized by many of the insurance companies. So as reiterating what Kyle covered earlier, special districts are agile agencies able to rapidly adapt to changing environments. Our affinity for collaboration and building community trust makes special districts uniquely positioned to drive the future of California. For North Tahoe, this includes leading studies and partnerships aimed at developing cohesive traffic management, emergency management systems, ultra-modern telemetric notification, emergency old-fashioned air raid sirens, partnerships with transportation. Excuse me, I'm going to go back a little bit. I want to mention the Tahoe Forest and Fuels team. Sorry, I got a little out of order there. Born out of the 2007 Angora Fire, Bi-State Blue Ribbon reports, known locally as the Tahoe Forest and Fuel team. Together, we have treated nearly 100% of the vacant parcels adjacent to our very high severity wildland-urban interface neighborhoods. Essentially, a shaded fuel break around our communities and facilitate over 50,000 defensible space inspections basin-wide. We coordinate through this team our local preparation activities, home adaptation, education, and emergency messaging, including social media, signboards, and AM radio transmitters. This year, we universally collaborated on, with our state and local partners, a regional approach to fire restrictions, banning the use of charcoal barbecues and open campfires during the fire season, both which are historical causes of fires within the basin. And this is what I was referring to previously. The district's been leading several studies and working on a collaboration with the 10 fire agencies that we are most tied to. The important piece of this is that this is basically banding together new technology and old technology so that we have ways to move people in and out of our communities in the case of emergency through traffic management systems and coordinated dispatch. And I think that ultimately coordination between special districts that do transportation and special districts that do fire will primarily drive the future of how we manage our evacuations, ingress and egress in fires in the future. And lastly, I'm going to end on this. This is just a list of who we actually collaborate with on a daily basis. So not just me, but my staff, obviously. It just gives you the vast amount of agencies, primarily special districts, but you see there's federal and state local partners as well. And that's what we're good at. And that's why I've always worked for special districts, and that's why I enjoy it. And I have some staff on, so when we get to question and answers, you can welcome to address any questions to myself or my staff. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Chief. So we have about 10 minutes left here for our questions and answers section. And I don't see any questions right now into the queue from our attendees. So feel free to add one if you'd like. One of the things I'll kick it off here real quick for our host districts is just talk a little bit about, some of you already did, but about the, working in how you basically paid for this work, in addition to, while balancing the fact that you guys are obviously providing, other services to your community. This is more of a longer-term projects that you guys have been working on. But can you just talk a little bit about how you balance the need to fund this type of work with your everyday operations?
Well, maybe Dane, I can start, and just to say that we're pretty fortunate to have some revenue from our hydroelectric side of our house, which is able to be put forward. I really think it's just vitally important that for special districts to understand that there is money out there, right? But I think it's also important that you have to, if you bring some money to the table, you can leverage it. We're leveraging local dollars right now, roughly 10-1, right? But it takes effort to get there, and it takes understanding how the funding system works at the state and at the federal level to do that. And I think working through associations like CSDA and CMUA, and then using our partners in DC to help as well, like on the NHA side and the American Public Power Association side, leverages those opportunities to the maximum extent. If you have a good project and you have even a little bit of local money, I think you can make this work, but it's really about wanting to do it at the local level.
Well, that prompt work, because now questions are starting to come in. So I'm going to start going through some of these. Let's go with this first one here. How much coordination do the districts do with Caltrans to clear spaces adjacent to roads for evacuation? Maybe Chief, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, first I want to follow up on something Andy said, just so that the audience really knows. So North Tahoe has been very successful about doing these projects, very much like the PCWA has. It's really challenging. Sorry, my sunlight just came out, snow stopped. It's really, really challenging for smaller agencies to have the infrastructure internally, the administrative infrastructure to be able to do these federal projects. Most of our projects are 9-1, 10-1 matches. But if I didn't have a full grant compliance department and the folks like our foresters on here to go out and prepare these projects, we would never get them done. CEQA and EIS, EIRs just tie these projects up for years. We are sponsoring 2 really large ones that we are involved in the Programmatic Timber Environmental Impact Report for the West and the West Shore partnerships. But I wanted to touch on that because I think one of the things the legislature do is there's some way to ease that, because having a consistent funding source that did not require, the FEMA part of this, which is a tremendous amount of work to keep up on audits and reporting. So, if you want to really get a upscale in our state, we have to simplify the funding stream. So with that, I'm going to go to Caltrans. Now, on the end day, we have a good relationship with Caltrans. They do not collaborate with special districts as well as most other partners. Sorry if you're out there, Caltrans.
Okay, let's go to our next question here. So can districts talk about the role of homeowner defensible space activities and how important that is as part of the overall strategy? And then what are the key barriers to homeowner compliance? Chief, that may be, I think that one's yours again to start off.
I'd like to kick that to Eric. Eric does our forest fuels coordination. He was the one you saw speaking a lot in the video. This is his division, and it's how we manage all these different things. And so, Eric, if you can pick that up, that'd be great.
All right, thanks, Chief. So defensible space activities, I mean, they're very important in the overall strategy. I mean, part of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team is over 20 agencies around Tahoe, everything from our large federal landowners of 150,000 acres around the basin to all the special districts, local fire protection districts, public utility districts, et cetera, coming together to mitigate wildfire threats. And a big portion of that is Tahoe has actually came together under one network of fire adapted communities to streamline grant funding through the Tahoe Resource Conservation District and provide subawards to each individual fire district to promote defensible space outreach education, free community chipping, neighborhood leader development, integration with NFPA's Firewise committees. And the end goal here is hazardous fuel reduction. We want to encourage community members to create effective defensible space so that they are contributing to treating acres, just like we would be doing through our community wildfire protection plans, both within the wildland urban intermix and wildland urban inter defense zones as our priority areas for treatment. So definitely very important as part of the overall strategy. You know, the main goal of a lot of this is if you're just throwing money at fuels treatment, you're not protecting infrastructure and resources and, you know, holding carbon as live trees, you know, maybe what is the purpose? The big purpose of this is to protect our communities and keep a stock of healthy, resilient forests in our backyards, in our communities, so that we have people that want to be taxpayers in our districts and live in these beautiful areas across the state. I'm going to go right into the next question. I think this one just would be great to kick to me as well. Hank Brady said, have any of the panelists working on fuel reduction calculated average cost of fuel reduction per acre? So that'd be compared to post-disaster mitigation costs per acre. Yes, FEMA's already done a huge analysis on this. FEMA's benefit cost analysis tool says any fuel reduction project under the cost of $5,250 per acre is determined cost effective. That's a very real treatment. I've seen treatments that have gone double on that. I say typically we can get the thinning work done for about $3,000 to $4,000 an acre. And then you might have some disposal fees, pile burning, et cetera. And that is on the ground implementation costs. That is not counting indirect costs, project planning, environmental analysis. That is your work, shovel ready projects ready to go and get the fuels abatement work done. So yeah, I think turning to that FEMA number is that really kind of sound science that, you know, $5,200 an acre, if you can do it for less than that, you're meeting a benefit cost analysis from the federal level. That's worth doing it in comparison to post-disaster mitigation.
Great, thank you, Eric. I'll go on to our next question we have queued up here. It's how do special districts and collaborating partners balance erosion control with defensible space and fuels management? And how do you balance these priorities when communicating with homeowners? For instance, competing priorities where erosion control may call for vegetation, but fire protection might require removing vegetation. So quite a good question, I think.
Eric, before you jump in, I think this is a really interesting question. Thank you. I didn't look who asked it. So if you turn the clock back to pre-2007, the TRPA, our Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, a federal bi-state agency for Lake Tahoe, was at odds with the fire chiefs. We were just fighting over that exact issue ongoing. The fire departments were trying to do fuels management and you know, do a defensible space and even the clean, mean, you know, areas right around the homes. And we were absolutely at odds. What happened after the Angora fire, and they saw how much sediment went into Tahoe in the billions of tons, there was a change, and we have a very good relationship with our land use agency now, and we work collaboratively, and we actually have put in place procedures where people clean their lots and do their defensible space work. We actually do have an MOU with them to do a lot of the tree marking and stuff that Eric does. And then as the fall, like right now, we let the pine needles accumulate as soon as we have moisture on the ground, so that as the erosion, which mostly takes place during the winter months, picks up the settlement. So we have found a very cooperative, cohesive management practice. And I said it in my talk, and I'll say it again. The big difference is we learned that good forestry and fuels management is good for the forest. It makes a healthier forest. There's not a competing interest here. We've learned that by doing the practices we do for fire, makes the forest healthy, and then of course that keeps our watershed healthy.
Maureen or Karen, do you want to jump in on this one as well too? Thought this might be a good one for an RCD with collaborating partners and.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you restate the question? I've got some homeschooling going on at the same time, which has been fun.
Sorry, the question was, how do special districts collaborating partners balance erosion control with defensible space and fuels management?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what he just said, that these are not competing priorities. We need to do both. We need to make sure that we're able to get out there into the forest and get things taken care of. And also post-fire and during the work we're doing, we need to just make sure that we can do that in the right way. And if you do forest management in the right way, you're not going to end up disturbing the soils enough that it's anything you really have to worry about. And that's why we have folks like the RCDs that are trained in being able to do this in an appropriate way. And it's also one of the main partnerships we have too with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in helping us provide that technical assistance to landowners. So everything we do is about the environment and keeping people safe, and we've learned ways to do that over the years.
Dane, let me, from PCWA's perspective, just what we've learned, right? So we're not foresters, but exactly what Karen said is right. There's ways to do this. On the French Meadows project, what we found is that so when we did a lot of fire modeling as part of the project design, so two things I want to echo that Mike said. One is that you can't come at forest management as if you're having an impact on the landscape by doing forest management. Your no project alternative has to be catastrophic wildfire. If you make that your no project alternative, anything you do is a benefit, right? And so the effects of catastrophic wildfire on erosion are tremendous. And so reducing the threat of catastrophic wildfire, especially burn intensity, reduces the inputs of sediment into our water courses. The second thing is, as part of our project design, we wanted to do carbon control, right? We got greenhouse gas reduction funding, so we needed to do carbon capture and carbon sequestration. But at the same time, we need to move some biomass off the hill and put it through a controlled process to create electricity. That's one way of doing carbon capture. The other thing is, though, we want to incorporate some of those chips back into the soil, and we're doing that pretty successfully. Not too much, not too little, and it's a learning process to do just the right amount so that you don't want to just leave them scattered because you get methane emissions from that. But if you do soil incorporation, you get really good erosion control, you get some of that carbon capture, but you don't increase the wildfire risk by just leaving chips all over the forest floor. There's a balance there. There's all kinds of experts out there that can help special districts find that balance.
We'll move on to our next question here. The question is, how much does control of invasive species figure into your vegetation management work? Because obviously many invasive species not only reduce biodiversity, but are more flammable. Who wants to jump on that one?
Go ahead. I think Maureen probably has a better answer.
Yeah, I can take that on. We do quite a bit of invasive species removal. We actually have a programmatic permit for Shasta County that we applied for. So we have a CEQA clearance to do that work. Yeah, especially for us because a lot of times when you get these invasive species that come in after a fire, it just exacerbates the recovery and makes the non-natives come back, not be able to come back. So we do a ton of that. It's definitely a balancing act. And actually, for as far as treating a fuel break after We've actually done the initial treatment, going back in and making sure that invasives don't come in. We do a lot of herbicide treatment in there. And that's actually very effective to keep, the fuels from converting to non-native species, but also to kind of prolong the life of the fuel break.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to say that at the state level, we're trying to make sure that that information is all out there of like how to do best practices to make sure that you're not accidentally bringing seeds along on your wheel wells or whatever else it is that you might be introducing those species. So we've worked with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and with the Invasive Plant Council and Native Plant Society, just to make sure that everyone has guidance to try to make sure that you have straw that's free of unwanted seeds, so that all the materials we're using don't exacerbate the problem. But when it does happen, because you can't make it perfect, like Maureen said, we've got ways to go out and just do quick chemical treatments and make sure that nothing gets out of control.
And I think as we've got
on that note, Dane, it's funny because my head immediately goes to aquatic because we have such aquatic issues. But Eric, I see he clicked off for a second, but we have this is the Comstock forest. It was logged 100 years ago. What's not invasive? And going through and trying to restore the natural species that may have existed here pre-Comstock is a huge challenge for our forestry professionals. But it does really lend itself to using some prescribed fire. And so regardless, there's lots of other manipulation, but one thing about prescribed fire is it does sort of weed out, it does weed out those that are non-fire tolerant, which would not have been species that survived pre-Comstock.
Right.
Yeah, just to support
everyone. And
I think same here that we've heard from other situations is partnership is another great way of combating this. We work really closely with our resource conservation districts, state agencies, California Tahoe Conservancy, and really lean our congressional regulatory agency at TRPA to really help with those invasive species concern, funding, making sure we're really putting together holistic projects. These are all multi-objective projects. There's no one mindset here. There's a ways to align multiple goals, multiple priorities within your project. And those mitigation measures, standard project requirements, as mentioned before, are definitely enacted in every project we do to help mitigate spread, and then reaching out for partnership in areas to address any invasive species concern that we might find while we're on the ground that someone else hasn't seen or known about before. So it's always important to provide that notification and work through partnership.
We got one last question here that I want to get to before we wrap up here. I want to keep people too long, but it says, are there any special districts that just do fire prevention and outreach, often volunteer-run fire councils do not have the staff or expertise to address the fire-related challenges many of our communities are facing? That, a couple of you referenced that, and
so let me take a shot. And I'm not gonna address exactly that point, but I want to say two things. PCWA, CMUA, CSDA, we've been working together and we're formulating sort of legislative strategies for the upcoming years on deploying state dollars, particularly to federal lands, but how to deploy state dollars, right? So the governor and the federal administration signed an MOU to treat 1 million acres in California, right? Really aspirational stuff, great start. I don't think they have any idea exactly how to accomplish that. Right. And I'm just being really honest. And so, in our view, the best way to put state dollars to work on some of these larger projects is to funnel them through counties, right? And counties can funnel that dollars through fire safe councils. Counties know where problems are. Special districts know where the problems are and the best way to get at them. But we also recognize that, so we're lucky in Placer County. We've got a fairly well-resourced county that can be that nexus of dollars from the state moving out to the ground. But a lot of counties aren't that lucky. And so you need some, you either got to really, really streamline the process or build some capacity within these counties to get dollars to do work on the ground. I think that's a priority. But second, it takes carrying capacity within these special districts. You got to be the banker. You got to pay contractors that are doing the work on the ground, and you may not get compensated from the state or federal grantee for 60, 90, 120 days. Well, can a lot of these places afford to have $2 or $3 million, a whole summer's worth of work on a large project on their bankroll while waiting to be compensated? I don't think so. That's a problem that I think we can solve through legislation. We really hope CSDA and CMUA can help us with that.
I'd like to add on to that as well, and I'm really adding to that point that when you look at it, it's fire safe councils, it's RCDs, there's a handful of folks that are really on the ground, or fire districts kind of doing this work. The Watershed, I think it's the Watershed Resources Center, put out a publication that looked at all these budgets and did a needs assessment. And of those organizations that are doing this work, something like 75% of them had a budget, and that's not the exact number, but it's close to it, of less than $100,000 a year. So you think about the scale that we need to get all of those acres done, and then you're putting that all in the hands of these $100,000 organizations, and then asking them to carry all of these costs over and over again, and it's just untenable. And when we work with the RCDs around this issue, simple things like doing advance payments, being able to really quickly turn around invoices, allowing them to pay contractors or get reimbursed before they paid the contractors, just little things like cash flow like that can launch them, because if they're waiting for these payments in the middle of a very short work season, it can often delay them for a year or 2 years just because they're waiting for a paycheck to come in.
Very good. Well, we're 10 minutes after the hour, and I want to be sensitive to people's time and just really appreciate all the attendees and certainly our panelists as well for taking the time today to be a part of this this webinar and this tour. We hope you enjoyed it. I would just note that the packet that you received yesterday has the contact information for all of the host districts and all the speakers today, so you can follow up with questions to those individuals. Obviously, you can follow up with us at CSDA too. We know how to reach all of them and can facilitate that question as well. And just want to say thank you once again. This is the first in a series of 5 tours that CSDA and our partner agencies will be doing over the next, essentially next month. Our next tour will be on December 2nd at 10 a.m., which will focus on adapting to climate change and resource management. So you can sign up through CSDA with that. So with that, we will go ahead and end today's event. Thank you so much again to everybody, panelists, attendees, for participating. We really appreciate it.